And we're live.
This is Hieromonk Enoch.
This is Deacon Joseph Sweden. And this is Orthodox Apologetics Live for Wednesday, the 12th, is it, news style?
Mm-hmm.
Right, so. Well, yesterday we ended on an interesting note because we were talking about St. Dionysius the Areopagite, the question of, pseudo-Dionysius versus real Dionysius. Father Enoch, I guess you did a little more research there, and if folks look in the chat, they can kind of see that going on.
Yeah, I mentioned in the previous program that how the first English translation. I mentioned a fellow named John Parker, and he was the first one to translate into English back in the 1890s the works of Saint Dionysius the Areopagite into English. And in the introduction to the work, to the Celestial Hierarchy, John Parker wrote a defense, and I posted in the chat. I also post a link to pravoslavi.ru that contains Parker's reply, along with this Romanian priest, Dimitri Stănescu. Okay, but Parker makes the following point. He says, the most plausible... let me see here. Okay, let me get to the point. I can bring it up. Let's see. Preface to the Celestial Hierarchy. Okay. Well, John Parker says the most plausible objection to the genuineness of these writings is thus expressed by Dupin. Dupin says Eusebius and Jerome wrote an accurate catalogue of each author known to them, with a few obscure exceptions, and yet never mentions the writings of the Areopagite. Parker says, great is the rejoicing in the house of the anti-Areopagites over this proof, in capital letters. But what are the facts? Eusebius acknowledges that innumerable works have not come to him. Jerome disclaims either to know or to give an accurate catalogue either of authors or works. The library of Caesarea contained 300,000 volumes, according to the modest computation of Dublé, according to Schneider, and many more. Now, the library, this is me interjecting, the library of Caesarea was this massive ecclesiastical library in Caesarea, and it existed until the 630s when the Muslims attacked Caesarea and they burned down the library. So there went up one of the greatest patristic collections ever. Anyway, Parker continues to says, Jerome says that there are some writings so illustrious in themselves that they will not suffer from not being mentioned by him. Jerome follows Dionysius on the heavenly hierarchy. Jerome's catalogue of illustrious men contains 135 names. Josephus is mentioned for his testimony to Christ, Seneca for his correspondence with St. Paul, Philo for his description of the Therapeutae of Alexandria, yet Dupin would have the unwary infer that Jerome gives a full catalogue of each author known to him with a few obscure exceptions. The ecclesiastical history of Eusebius treats of the nature of Christ, the companions of the apostles, the martyrdoms, the succession of bishops, the persecutions, the folklore of the church of the 4th century. The book would fill about 125 pages, yet Dupin would have us believe that he gives a complete catalogue. He does not give the writings of Hymenaeus and Narcissus, of Athenagoras and Pantinus, nor a complete list of Clement, Origen, and Dionysius of Alexandria. His silence, in my opinion, is owing to odium theologicum. According to Eusebius, hold on, there's a misquotation here in the text here. 1 second. Okay. I was reading off the wrong website. Hold on 1 second. I have to go down to the actual page. Okay. Okay. All right. That was addressing the objections to the genuineness of its authenticity. If you go to Parker's book, I can't really go all over it, but basically he says.
The links themselves, they have the citations, the footnotes.
I was going to continue reading the Tertullian.org site, but the problem is that when they typed it out, they didn't type out the Greek characters correctly, so there's some kind of character flaw in the text actually. But anyway, you can read the different responses that Parker gives, and they're interesting, and I think they actually have a lot of worth to them.
Oh, absolutely, and I think that it's not as simple as just discounting things as real or fake, especially when you're talking about writings of this time period. And the fact remains that St. Dionysius' work is regarded highly throughout the church, has been for past 1900 years, unless you'd like to argue past 1600 years, regardless of when you'd like to place the dating.
Okay, now this is interesting. In the link I gave in the chat to that's the Google Books link. If you go to page 7, you find the mention that Anastasius of Antioch and Maximus the Martyr both affirm. Now, St. Anastasius of Antioch was Patriarch of Antioch. I'm not sure who Maximus the Martyr was. But anyway, they both affirm that St. Dionysius, the famous Bishop of Alexandria, who's a 3rd century writer, wrote scholia upon the works of Dionysius the Areopagite. So that's kind of like a commentary in between the lines, or like kind of a commentary. Maximus, in his commentary on the 5th chapter of the Celestial Hierarchy, Maximus the Martyr actually I think I think he means Maximus the Confessor here. When speaking upon the word ousios, as applied in that chapter to the holy angel, says St. Maximus the Confessor says, the great Dionysius, the Bishop of Alexandria, who had been a rhetorician, in the scholia which he made upon the blessed Dionysius, his namesake, thus speaks, the external philosophy was accustomed to call all invisible nature uncreated, and the personalities beings, and hence says that expressions of this kind are used by the holy Dionysius inappropriately, that is, after the manner of the external philosophers. Inappropriately, they give the term katakristikos. It probably doesn't mean inappropriately in the sense of evilly or bad, but maybe inaccurately or not as precisely. Maximus, in writing a commentary upon Dionysius, Maximus is writing a commentary upon Dionysius the Areopagite. He alludes to a word in the text. He says that Dionysius, Bishop of Alexandria in the 3rd century, in commenting upon the use of the word in the text, affirms that the divine Dionysius, that is the Areopagite, uses that word in the sense of the Greek philosophers and not quite exactly. Maximus further proves that Dionysius of Alexandria was the bishop of the 3rd century by describing him as having been a rhetorician. The characteristic of Bishop of Alexandria is a pupil of Origen. Now that's interesting because that would show that there was a work well known, at least in St. Maximus the Confessor's time, where attributing there was a scholia or a commentary by St. Dionysius.
They were attributing things to St. Dionysius.
Well, in other words, there was a commentary by St. Dionysius of Alexandria in the 3rd century, which St. Dionysius comments upon the works of St. Dionysius the Areopagite. All right, so right there, that proves to us that it was
well known.
Yeah, by the time of the 3rd century, it was so well known and well respected that someone like St. Dionysius of Alexandria was writing a commentary upon it. So do we really need to go into much more?
I don't think so. I think that there is information available for the readers if you want to grab it. If you're interested in this subject and you're a listener, please, we invite you to go ahead, learn more, read more, and then you might find it says something about modern scholarship as well, in terms of what we accept uncritically versus what we tend to apply a lot of criticism to.
And secondly, the other point is, what are the arguments of those who countered the anti-authenticity, those who were the pro-authenticity people? We oftentimes just hear the arguments of the critics, but never the reply. So, look at both sides. Okay. Do we have Basil sent us a question. He says, what should we do with Origen and Evagrius? They have been condemned, yet St. Basil and St. Gregory wrote an original Philokalia composed of choice quotes from Origen's writing. Both even feature in the Philokalia of St. Nicodemus. Did St. Basil and St. Gregory condemn or criticize Origen themselves, but merely use him as they used the Greeks by sifting the good from the bad? I know there's something called the Philokalia of Origen. I have the 4-volume set of Callistos Ware and Mother Mary's translation of the Philokalia downstairs. I have to go look in it after the episode, but I'm not quite sure. Was Origen included in that by St. Nicodemus? I'm not quite sure if he was. Maybe I might be wrong about that. We can talk about this next episode. But I think they probably Origen and Evagrius, how were they used by St. Basil and St. Gregory? I think you're pretty accurate, Basil, when you say that they sifted them, but take the good and leave the bad. A lot of times during the time of, I know you had someone called Didymus the Blind. I'm not sure if Didymus was actually condemned in persona by the Fifth Council. I think he may have been mentioned, but I'm not sure if he was actually condemned. I know Didymus the Blind and a few other people defended Origen in the 4th century against the attempts of the Arians to claim Origen was an Arian. So it's very possible that the Cappadocian Fathers didn't really concentrate a whole lot upon Origen because they may have thought they had bigger fish to fry, in the sense of fighting the Arians, who actually were in control of the government and of the official so-called official church. You can compare this to a certain extent, I think, to let's say Saint Cyril of Alexandria. St. Cyril of Alexandria had kind of wanted to anathematize Theodore of Mopsuestia because he realized what he had been teaching, that he was the real originator of Nestorianism. But he realized that if he tried to do that, there were so many people who still respected him, who would have tried to defend him against the accusations, that it would have just prolonged the schism with the Antiochian church. And so he said, well, I'll leave the situation of dealing with Theodore Mopsuestia to future generations, and I won't deal with it now. So I think you could probably see the same thing with St. Basil and St. Gregory. I also kind of remember there was this argument between Rufinus of Aquileia and St. Jerome, who they had been friends at one point, and they became like really inveterate enemies. In which Rufinus boasted to have read all the works of Origen. And I think St. Jerome said something like, well, that's impossible. No one could read, I guess Origen wrote a lot more works than we have now. No one could have written that many works. Yeah. So it's also possible St. Basil and St. Gregory hadn't read everything. Generally, people point out to the De Principiis, I think, which is kind of the main work of Origen. Though the question is, do they have accurate copies? For example, Rufinus of Aquileia translated a copy of the De Principiis from Greek and the Latin, but he omitted everything that seemed to be heretical, which was what made St. Jerome very upset, because St. Jerome thought, Rufinus is trying to promote Origen, but Rufinus was like, well, no, I don't believe Origen, because there were still a lot of people trying to claim that Origen didn't teach these things, that these were like interpolations.
Yeah.
Writings. And I think in the case of St. Basil and St. Gregory, if you're a Cappadocian Father, you're a bishop of like an isolated see, the government is controlled by Arian heretics, the official so-called church is controlled by Arian heretics, they've condemned and anathematized you, and they're trying to arrest you and exile you all the time, you may not have a lot of time to concentrate upon manuscript studies and deciding whether Origen actually said this or not.
That's true.
So I think you have to take a lot of that into context. They may have just simply thought, let's just wait to future generations. Let's deal with, Orthodox convincing people not to become Arians first. But we can talk more about this the next episode, I think. Okay. I don't think we have any questions in the chat at the moment. Are you there, Father?
Oh yeah, I'm here.
Were there any subjects we wanted to address? Anything in the news or something that might relate to apologetics?
No, I mean, there's not too much. Somebody was asking me, I guess this Johnny KZJ, well, I guess he's kind of like he's trying to do his own, like kind of a newer apologetics channel, and he asked about Bullingerism. I'm assuming that Bullingerism, I'm wikiing this now, hyper dispensationalism. It's like mid-acts dispensationalism. He was saying, and he seems to be gaining ground among Protestantism today, and he kind of wanted us to devote an episode to it.
I don't know enough about it. I kind of been out of the circle of Protestantism for a long time. So
yeah, I mean, it's something. I mean, it doesn't sound like it's like really difficult to answer. I'm looking at the wiki, this hyper dispensationalism. So,
can you put the link in the chat so I can look?
Yeah, it's another wacky Protestant offshoot. This one seems to be more based upon. Hold on, I'll just put the link in there.
Now, what's interesting is up until the early 1800s or around the 1700s, I think most forms of Protestantism would have been what is considered amillennialist.
Yeah,
which is essentially the Orthodox position and the old Roman Catholic position too.
Right. This is all very recent.
Yes. I mean, every now and again you would find what's called a historicist or historic millennialist, but they would not have believed in anything like a rapture or any of that other stuff. That's all. I think that the rapture stuff is all from what John Darby and kind of development from him in the 1830s, the Plymouth Brethren or something like that. Okay, so it's called Bollingerism, and there's actually is there a separate this from E.W. Bollinger was an Anglican clergyman and ultra dispensationalist theologian. Let me see. What are the basic tenets of it?
Hello?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
The basic tenets that are listed here are about the hyper-dispensationalism holds that the early Christian church lost, quote, 4 basic truths starting near the end of the Apostle Paul's ministry are in order of loss. Yeah, I know. I don't come up with this stuff. The distinctive message and ministry of the Apostle Paul.
Oh.
The pre-tribulational rapture of the church, the body of Christ. The difference between Israel and the church, the body of Christ. Justification by faith alone in Christ alone.
Okay, wait. I'm looking at this. Okay. This essentially is as close as they're coming into, the closest they're getting to, what was it called? The great apostasy view.
Yeah.
Which is the view you find by the Mormons and the Jehovah's Mormons that basically...
They're like skirting the edge between the Assemblies of God and the Mormons.
Yes, that basically, because the Mormon view was that once John the Apostle died or during his lifetime, corruption came and the whole church collapsed at that point. All right, and although they claim the church actually continued to exist in Mexico, because of the Israelites living in Mexico.
All of these groups, they end up studying and they start to realize that they can't really hold the positions that they hold consistently. And then some groups break off and they're like, well, those positions are still consistent.
For example, it says Martin Luther is supposed to be credited with the recovery of justification by faith, and John Nelson Darby with the church truth. Now, here's the problem. If justification by faith alone, which is really what they mean, if that is a doctrine of the faith, then how was anybody saved from the time of the 100 AD to the time of Martin Luther?
Well, what they're saying is that nobody was saved from that.
Exactly.
The church was lost. They brought it back.
Yeah, they say the truths advocates say were gradually recovered in reverse order. So you had justice sola fide, faith alone, and then you have the church truth by John, which is tribulation, rapture.
Yeah.
They reject water baptism. Wow. So that's like the Quaker stuff. They reject water baptism, which divides them from mainstream dispensationalists, which are often Baptist, or some of the Presbyterians. They believe in baptism made without hands and without water by the Spirit, which occurs once a believer believes in Christ as Savior, which is the blah blah blah. While hyper dispensationalists reject water baptism, they still practice the communion. Is this really gaining ground among some of the Protestants? I used to think only the Quakers rejected any type of baptism, but I guess not.
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if to some degree it's becoming more popular simply because I've noticed that, Protestants seem to have to tend towards either A, becoming closer to a liturgical type of Protestantism, or if they just have to keep on just, I hate to say it, but kind of letting it ride on the outskirts, hoping that, this completely inconsistent theology will survive somehow.
If you look at this E.W. Bollinger, if you look at his other if you go to the website about the Wikipedia about E.W. Bollinger,
oh boy,
here's some of his other views. He believes the Lord argue that the death of Jesus occurred on a Wednesday, not a Friday.
Oh, right. Well, okay.
Jesus was crucified on a single upright stake without a crossbar. Now that's Jehovah's Witness.
Jehovah's Witness
exactly. With 4, not just 2 criminals. And that this last view
he doubled the number of criminals.
Yeah, and that this last view was supported by a group of 5 crosses of different origins in Brittany. He argued for the mortality of the soul, so he believed in essentially annihilationism.
Soul sleep, yeah.
Yeah, he did not believe. No. Soul sleep is different.
Annihilation.
He believed in soul death. Soul sleep would be like Martin Luther believed in soul sleep, which is the view that your soul doesn't need to exist, but is in like this quasi-conscious, dreamlike state, like you're in a perpetual dream.
Bollinger was a supporter of the theory of the gospel in the stars.
Which states the constellations to be Christian depressions of Christian. So he believed in astrology, apparently.
He was a modern flat earther.
He opposed evolution. Well, that's not bad. He was a member of the Universal Zetetic Society, a group claiming dedicated to believing and promoting the idea the Earth is flat. He chaired a meeting in London. He sounds like a very kind of weird guy.
Very unique.
Very heretical.
So they wrote a book called How to Enjoy the Bible. Well, I mean, making it up seems to be
exactly making up the crucifixion. He was a big Zionist. Well, that goes with all these dispensationalists. Well, it seems like it just gets crazier and crazier. Of course, he was never kicked out of the Church of England, because anybody could be in
the Church of England.
People act like, oh, this is a 20th century thing where you have all this, anybody can believe anything.
No,
well,
it's
just the Overton window of the Anglican Church moves every generation a bit.
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, I don't know if we can. I mean, we're kind of laughing at it. I mean, I guess.
I mean, we can do a response to the concepts, the basic concepts of the hyperdispensationalist theory. That's not a problem. I mean, this stuff it's not new. It's just it just gets reconfigured in a different way by a different group. So,
maybe we should do another program just disputing dispensationalism.
We'll work on it, Johnny. We'll work on it.
All right. Okay. Let me see. What else do we have to cover? Okay, I wanted to bring up a point that about the Council of Elvira, which was held in the early 4th century.
Okay.
And I think around 310. Can you look up when the first Council of Elvira was held? They say around 310. Supposedly may have been held during the Diocletian persecution.
Okay, hold
on. One of the points is that people bring up Canon 36 of the council, and they claim that this canon prohibits the making of images.
324.
324, really?
Yes.
Is that not an early dating to it?
Some say 313.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway,
it's a 300.
Okay. So one of the points I wanted to bring up is that a lot of scholars and some manuscript traditions only include 21 canons of the council. So the so-called 36 canon, which is translated erroneously to make it out be like you can't have icons, is not even an original canon of the council. And I'm going to put a link in the chat to this. There's a book called "The Canons of the Early Development of Canon Law and the Council of Sardica," and in this, on page what is the page we have? Page 41, and I'll put the link here in the chat. We read the following about the Council of Elvira. Hopefully, tell me if that link works there, Father Joseph.
Okay.
Okay, so what we find in the book is the following. A question arises, however, with regard to the origins of the long series of canons attributed to the bishops of Elvira, nearly 4 times the length of any other series enacted by a 4th century council. Maurice Menet has presented an analysis concluding that only the first 21 canons are authentic to the council, and that the additional 60 were added to the original series from other sources later in the century, all under the name of Elvira, by an early Spanish collector.
Right.
Preliminary indications of the heterogeneous nature of the series are given in the flat contradiction between canons 1 and 59, the near complete topical disorder among canons 22 to 81, as contrasted with a pattern of topical sequencing among the first 21, by an experimental but logical grouping of the Elviran canons in 3 sets. Meunier conducts a comparative analysis of the likely influence, the one way or the other, between the canons in the Elviran groups and the canons similar in content in other 4th century series. From this, he concludes that the canons 1 to 21 were indeed original to Elvira, but that the canons in the other 2 groups derive from periods later in the first half of the 4th century up to the Council of Sardica, 343 and beyond. Now, I should note it's not actually that it's actually not unheard of that when you deal with Spanish manuscript collections, that you find various, like, for example, I think there are, like, from the Third Council of Toledo, which had all kinds of interpolation in it. Sometimes you find like only 10 canons or 12 canons in some manuscripts. Sometimes they have 20 or more canons. All right. So sometimes when people were composing manuscript collections, they would take a council and they'd add a whole bunch of other canons. But where do those canons come from? They may actually have been capitula from some local, just from even a diocesan synod that wasn't even a local synod of a group of bishops. Or it could have been just some guy who was reading in a book and thought, well, I think this canon should be in here, you know? So that's why a lot of times people were very careful about how they numbered the canons and such. Anyway, I'm just saying I've seen that in Spanish manuscript collections. So this actually is not that how do you say surprising. I actually wrote an article on NFTU where I mentioned this about 2 years ago. I actually remember that now. Okay, so I think we have about 35 minutes left. I'm not sure. Let me see what else information we have to bring up. Okay.
We have a question here, which is interesting.
Oh, someone asked a question, actually, huh?
Oh, yep. It's Atomic Lead. Why has Isaac the Syrian been accused of being an Nestorian? Is there any truth to this? Also, good evening, fathers.
Good evening.
Well, the main reason that he's assumed to be Nestorian is quite simply because of geography, and at the time, the split that was taking place, the split was still very much alive in that period, and so in that sense, he doesn't write anything that is specifically Nestorian to my recollection, but he was a saintly guy who happened to be in the Nestorian regions.
Well, probably one of the best articles on this subject, ironically, was published by Hakna, the Holy Transfiguration Monastery.
It surprised me they published his ascetical homilies.
Well, they published in the appendix this very long, like 40-page defense of St. Isaac the Syrian. Now, I think it was written by Dr. Dana Rohrbach, or not? Right, he was not Rohrbach. That may be a congressman. You know who I'm talking. He was a former Hakna monk.
Yes.
And then they tried to sue him, and he was, it was a whole tragedy.
Back and forth, but it was still a fantastic essay.
Yeah, and his essay's interesting because they put more time in defending St. Isaac than they did in trying to defend St. Augustine.
They had a reason for that. That's because Hakna was involved in the whole law. They were working with Lazar Puhalo and Kylamiros in that whole renovation from the right thing. So it's not that they wanted to put effort into defending St. Augustine. They wanted to make sure he went away.
Oh, I know. But anyway, if you read that, I'm not sure if you can find that anywhere online now. But if you get a copy of the ascetic homily of St. Isaac the Syrian in the appendix, there's this very, very good defense of St. Isaac. Another point to bring up is everybody kind of, not just the Nestorians claim him, the Orthodox and the Syro-Jacobites claim him as well.
Yeah.
And everybody's like, oh, well, he wrote in Syriac, therefore he couldn't have been Orthodox because only the Syro-Jacobites and the Nestorians wrote in Syriac. Well, that's actually not true. In the Antiochian Patriarch up into the 17th century, the Divine Liturgy was actually celebrated not just in Greek and Arabic, but also in Syriac. And it kind of just died out when Arabic kind of took over. So Syriac itself doesn't imply any of that. I think there are some modern writers that have tried to conclude that St. Isaac was actually a Nestorian. For example, Hilarion Alfeyev, who was the effective second in command of the Moscow Patriarch, wrote a book where he tries to assert that St. Isaac the Syrian was a member of the Nestorian Church and that also he taught universalism or apocatastasis. But obviously because Hilarion Alfeyev believes in all that stuff and Emma Slavi and all the rest. So there are some of these like more heretical modernist writers that they have an agenda in defending St. Isaac the Syrian because they think, well, if they can defend St. Isaac, I hate that. Let me rephrase myself. They have an agenda in defending St. Isaac the Syrian in the way they're doing it, not in defending St. Isaac as a saint. They have an agenda in portraying St. Isaac as a historian because that emphasizes the ecumenist theory heresy. All right. So they believe if they can prove Isaac the Syrian was a member of the Nestorian Church and not in communion with the Orthodox Church, then that will lead to the conclusion that the boundaries of the Church go beyond the visible limits and that the Nestorians and the Roman Catholics are also part of the Church. That's all where a lot of this all comes from. It's not just disinterested scholarly research into the subject.
Right, yeah.
Because when you ask people, I think when you ask people what evidence in the works of St. Isaac shows he's Nestorian, and I guess the most they can come up with is stuff like, well, he never talks about Theotokos versus Christotokos. All right. But you could probably find I don't know. You could probably find, for example, St. Salvian of Gaul. I don't think he mentions that discussion whatsoever in his book called The Government of God, written in the early 400s. All right. because he wasn't writing about that, about complicated, or Christological discussions. All right. Like, for example, some of the works of Saint Ephraim the Syrian don't address some of that stuff. That doesn't really prove anything, So just because you find a writer who doesn't really mention a debate, that doesn't prove he's an historian. They were early Greek translations of the writings of Saint Isaac the Syrian. Now, and those were made, I think, at the Mar Saba monastery in Jerusalem. And Mar Saba has always been an Orthodox monastery. Okay, so why would disciples of Saint Isaac the Syrian flee to Mar Saba monastery and translate his writings into Greek? Why would they be received into Orthodox monastery unless Saint Isaac was Orthodox? So, I think another point to bring out is oftentimes there was an incentive by the Persian emperors and then later some of the Muslim authorities to try to put Nestorians into power in some of these areas. For example, the Islamic Golden Age, that whole like late 600s and 700 period when they had all these writings and supposed discoveries, those were mostly made by Nestorians. For example, Nestorians, in fact, were one of the most powerful groups under the Muslims. All right? So, that would result in things like, I don't know, them getting the Muslims to expel actually Orthodox Assyrian writers and, scholars and teachers to, essentially place all the dioceses they can under Nestorians. So I think those are pretty compelling. We could do it. Could do a whole other program on that. But I have not seen any convincing evidence that says that St. Isaac is an historian. I don't know. What do you have to say about that, Father?
No, I mean, I agree with you 100% on that. I mean, and I think it would be great to devote an episode to the non-Chalcedonians in general, to the Monophysites, to the Nestorians. I'm not against that. I'd like to, I'd like to see that done.
Okay, there's a book here called The Sabaeite Heritage in the Orthodox Church from the 5th century to the present. Okay, it says, finally, it should be noted that a number of monastic writings of East Syriac providence, mainly, including many by St. Isaac the Syrian, are found in the Syriac manuscripts of the monastery of St. Catherine in Sinai. Links between Mar Saba, that's what I was talking about, in Jerusalem, I think that's Jerusalem, and St. Catherine's were often close, as is witnessed notably by the career of the Georgian scribe, John Zosimus, at the end of the 10th century, who was active first at Mar Saba and later at St. Catherine's. In light of these scattered pieces of information, it turns out that the presence at Mar Saba of a Syriac work by a monk of the Church of the East, this is them bringing in their stuff now, is not necessarily so surprising. After all, monks from the Church of the East sometimes traveled to Palestine, and the ecclesiastical relations were evidently generally harmonious. Okay, so first off, this is Sebastian Brock writing this article, and I'm going to put a link to it in the chats. I'm going to break some of it down just very briefly. Sebastian Brock is kind of I think he's either Roman Catholic or Anglican, but he's kind of one of these like Syriac scholars. East Syrian. He's actually considered a very good Syriac scholar, but he's also a big ecumenist. All right. So my question about his writing here is that, so he's acknowledging there were a lot of, links between Mar Saba and St. Catherine's Monastery and a lot of Syriac writings of St. Isaac the Syrian in these monasteries. But he attributes this to close ecclesiastical relations or harmonious ones between the Church of the East. By that he means the Nestorian Church and the Orthodox Church. All right. But I don't, that seems to be an assumption on his part. Why can't the other assumption be simply that there were East Syriac speaking, East Syriac Orthodox Christians? All right. So he gives information. Then in the second paragraph, I think he kind of gives his own opinion about how to explain this. All right. He says the monastery of Mar Saba was clearly a polyglot community in the early Arab period, with a flourishing scribal tradition in Arabic and Georgian as well as in Greek. For Syriac scribal activity of the monastery, there is unfortunately only one piece of firm evidence, but this happens to be of great relevance: a Syriac manuscript of Isaac's ascetic homilies, the opening 8 folios of which are preserved in Paris, specifically state in its title that it is the Book of Holy Mar Isaac, monk and bishop of Nineveh, written in the holy monastery of Bet Mar Saba of Jerusalem, and belongs to the priest Theophilus. According to Francois Now, the manuscript may date from the end of the 8th century. That's interesting. So the end of the 700s. Precisely. Now, Father Joseph, look up for me what date St. Isaac the Syrian is assumed to have died in. Can you look up that for me real quick?
The death of St. Isaac the Syrian?
Yeah, as it was around 700 or something like that.
Hold on. It was Isaac the Syrian died in 700 even. Yeah, he died 700 in Nineveh.
Okay, so in other words, precisely the time it says when the Greek translation of Isaac's homilies were made at Marsabella by Abba Patirikos and Abba Abramios. All right, so now that's interesting. He says the Syriac text of Isaac's homilies is translated to us in two parts. The first containing 82 homilies, and the second 41. Although at least some homilies of the second part were known to and copied by Syriac-speaking Orthodox monks. Interesting. It was only the first part that came to be translated into Greek. In fact, not all Syriac homilies were translated, for 14 of the Syriac homilies in the first part are absent from the Greek translation. On the other hand, the Greek translations include 5 texts that are absent from the Syriac, etc., etc. Now, here's a question. It says, it seems highly probable that the Sabai monks, so the Sabai monks, Patricios and Abramios, were translating from a Syriac manuscript where all these texts belonging to, in fact, to 3 different authors already collected together under Isaac's name. Since John the Elder belonged to the early 8th century, this means, now who is John the Elder? This means that the Greek translation of Isaac's works cannot be earlier than the late 8th century. A terminus antiquum of some time in the early 9th century is provided by the earliest Greek manuscripts of Isaac. So I still see no evidence, even in this. I can't give a full view of the article because it cuts off at the next page. That, let me see. John the Elder. I'm just doing online research right now. John the Elder, Isaac the Syrian, Marsaba. I think I actually looked up this whole question like 2 or 3 years ago. Let's say Philoxenos and John the Elder. Let me see. Okay, according to Vatican Syriacus 125. Okay, for 4 letters. Let's see. In particular, the Syriac text from which Patricios and Abramios must have been working in making the translation of Isaac must have had the 4 letters of John the Elder already interpolated into the midst of Isaac homilies. For in all the early Greek manuscripts, the first 3 of these, John Saba, come. Wait, is John's? Wait. John the Elder is the same as John Saba. All right. Okay. Anyway, there's a lot of info. I can't go through all of this right now, but I seem to recall that John Saba or John the Elder was a disciple of Saint Isaac the Syrian, and that he later went to Marsaba Monastery, where he was given the name Marsaba. I mean not Marsaba, but Saba. So that would seem to indicate to me that he felt his whatever, that Saint Isaac was Orthodox. So, anyway, do you have anything to add to that, Father?
No. I mean, it's a very interesting history on I guess you could say the interplay between the Orthodox at Marsaba and St. Catherine's, and in terms of
well, the question is, I think they're making assumptions about assuming that St. Isaac was part of the Nestorian Church here.
Well, I think that they're just kind of hoping that that's just implied.
Yeah, I don't see it implied here. Just because
I think that anyone who legitimately looks at the life and how those writings were transmitted would have no doubt that he's an Orthodox saint. But because so few people know it, again, it comes down to that whole thing, like with Hildebrand and the Schism. Since people don't know the history, they just assume it.
Yep, or they read articles by people who assume it.
Yeah, and unfortunately, false narratives take hold, and that's how things become the way they do.
Okay, I guess we're out of questions then, aren't we? Okay. Are you there, Father? Yeah, I'm here. Yeah. I think we don't really have any more. I think we're kind of closing down on the questions segment.
Atomically, like that, it was quite.
Okay, now this is interesting. I was also reading. There's a fellow called John of Daliatha.
Seriously, Brandon, please listen to the beginning of the show.
What happened?
No worries, it's fine. Brandon just asked, "Hello, fathers. What do you think of the claim that Saint Dionysius the Areopagite wasn't the author of the works that were attributed to him?" Please scroll up also, because Father Enoch includes some links that we're talking about at the beginning of the show for the first 10 minutes or so on Saint Dionysius the Areopagite.
Okay, now this John, the John the Elder, also called Yohanan Saba. Okay, Saba means elder, apparently. Okay. He was a famous spiritual writer. He was condemned by the Nestorian Patriarch Timothy I. That's interesting. Anyway, there's a lot of interesting writings. There's a lot of interesting. To me, when I read stuff like this, I'm like, oh, there's some sort of subtext going on here. Anyway. Okay. Okay, so we answered that. Okay, so any other? We have about 20 minutes left. Let's see. Okay, so in a pot, Hans Zimmerman, I think on the group asked about the dream of Saint Gregory the Great.
Yeah, that comes from the letter of Ulrich of Imola. It is on our Facebook page. In the document section, the letter of Ulrich of Imola to Hildebrand, which was from 1100. But let me see here if I was to go to that, just get the document. But in any case, let's see.
Maybe we need to bring on like additional people, Father Joseph.
What do you mean?
Like maybe like we have to have like not like an extra guests.
Well, yeah, but I mean, who are we going to invite? I mean, the point is, I would love to invite. I throw in some Roman Catholics or some Jehovah's Witnesses or something. But the truth is that none of them are going to come on this show. We can try it. We've had. I mean, we're arguing.
What would happen is if like you invited a Roman Catholic on, they'd have like their quote mining website pulled up, and they just start reading.
But so what? We've dealt with quote mining websites before. We're not afraid of quote mining.
I know that.
But that's why you have multiple tabs in the browser. But in any case, ultimately it's this: if somebody wants to challenge us, or somebody wants to challenge the Orthodox position, let's not make it personal. Tell them about it. We'd love to see them in the comment section first. If they really want to have a chat, we'd love to give them an attempt if they could. But I somehow doubt anyone's going to do that. Okay, I don't know why he wrote J. Dyer. I thought J. Dyer just became Orthodox. Anyway, let's see. Speaking of Gregory the Great, it's St. Gregory the Great. Was St. Mark of Ephesus the only one who affirmed the story of him praying for Emperor Trajan, or were there others?
The Whitby Life of St. Gregory the Great, which is the earliest life, talks about it.
Oh, okay. So that's
from, I think, the 600s or something.
Okay. So St. Mark obviously knew his 600s Latin text.
I think what happened is a lot of these early things had kind of been collated into Greek translations. Like during the time of Pope St. Zachary in the 740s, I think. Like Pope St. Zachary was the last of the major Greek-speaking popes. And he translated, for example, like the dialogues of St. Gregory into Greek. And I think he also probably translated like lives and other texts about St. Gregory into the Greek language.
Well, okay, Atomic Lead asks, for Catholics, Taylor Marshall or Edward Feser? Do you know?
Well, Feser's a philosopher to begin with. He's a Thomist philosopher.
Oh, so he's probably he's got more money. He's probably
No, he wouldn't do anything like that. We'd be too small. I mean, it would be,
We'd be small potatoes for him.
Exactly.
I mean, most Taylor Marshall is, but he sounds.
I think he's a Roman Catholic apologist of some sort.
I've heard the name before.
He has a website that has some interesting stuff on it.
Let me see. Hold on. Yep, Taylor Marshall. Okay, let's see. This new St. Thomas Institute guy?
I guess.
Let's look a big guy. All right, let's see here. Long time.
I mean, we don't have to bring on people that are going to angrily debate us, but people who have
angrily debate us.
What I mean is maybe other people who have written interesting things to almost talk about. For example, something they've written that's actually defending orthodoxy. Maybe that could be interesting. I mean, I don't know. I'm just talking. How blessed is Antidoran, Father Joseph?
I'm not. We're not going there. It's just so blessed. No, okay. All right, I'm looking here. Oh, is he really offering the Latin Mass Challenge? I remember when that was done. What was that? The Traditio.org that used.
What is the Latin Mass Challenge? I'm not familiar with it.
The Latin Mass Challenge is go to Latin Mass 4 times in a row and you'll never go back. It's
that sounds like a gimmick of some sort.
We should do that. We do Western Rite Mass. Attend our Mass 4 times in a month and you'll never go back. I guarantee. Okay. So anyway, the point is, it's one of those things. But our Latin mass is better than their Latin mass, so yeah, I give them the same challenge. But the point is that so this Taylor Marshall fellow seems interesting. Um, yeah, I mean we would. It's up to the listeners. You go and you tell them. We'll answer him. Um, I can't think of anyone of real interest. I've debated people I've debated people many years ago, and there's very few.
Atomic Lead says angry debates would be interesting for us in the peanut gallery.
Oh, I bet they would. They would also take up time too. We wouldn't have any of these.
I know, like Paul says, we're trying to decide what to do. Well, we're now doing the format where it's like an hour program each night, as opposed to
So in other words, if we run out of stuff, we just we can just kind of wing it. Just kidding.
Well, they're going to. I know this kind of not quite is tangentially related to apologetics, but the latest news on the whole Ukrainian autocephaly stuff, which we really don't. I mean, we're not in commune with either side, so we don't really. But just because people are interested in this discussion,
on the plus side, they aren't in communion with each other.
Exactly. It's not. But an interesting point to bring up is they're supposedly going to have this Sobor in Ukraine sometime in December. And it's already, the 12th today, or the 13th?
Yeah.
On the new calendar or something like that. And supposedly there's been all these conditions, like Philaret is like, I'm still going to be I'm going to still be like Patriarch Emeritus. He wants to be at least Patriarch Emeritus, almost like Pope Benedict is Pope Emeritus. No one's ever heard of that before, like, Patriarch Emeritus or something like that. And, I follow Portal Credo and a few of these other sites that are kind of weird, but they kind of have interesting.
It's kind of funny that when you think about it, because in the few cases where in history patriarchs have retired, they usually don't they take the great schema and retire to a monastery.
Well, yes, unless you get to the post-Ottoman period. The post-Byzantine period, like the 1600s, where different patriarchs are scheming overthrow each other, and they like you have like the same patriarch. He'll be like patriarch 3 different times.
Like 4 times, and
yeah, because he gets the other patriarch arrested, and he bribes the Sublime Porte, which is the name for the Ottoman authorities and things like that. I mean, that's not a good precedent to follow here.
Yeah.
But it doesn't seem like that's
Emeritus. It's just such a joke.
The thing is with someone like Philaret Denisenko is, remember, he is essentially, I think, kind of like the apex of the Soviet bishop.
Yeah.
All right. I think I think you probably have people just as worse as him, but he got the closest to getting on top, and he's just not going to give up. He's like, I think he's already going to be 90 in January.
Yeah.
So I think people like that, like they spent too much. They're not going to believe they're going to repent. That's like a 1 in a billion chance that that's ever actually going to happen with people. Like, unfortunately, they've invested so much time and money into destroying people. I mean, he didn't even invent the Kievan Patriarch. He basically took it over after he killed Patriarch Volodymyr.
Yeah.
I mean, so it's not like you're even dealing with somebody who cares about that. I mean, they kind of tried to damn Volodymyr Romanuk's memory because he Volodymyr. I mean, we've already talked about this. Romanuk tried to even get rid of Philaret. But once you let Philaret into an organization, he especially when he was in his prime, he knows how to take over an organization.
Yep.
All right. Because anybody who gets to the top of the Soviet hierarchy doesn't get to the top of the Soviet hierarchy in the 1980s without being very ruthless to begin with. And people like him and Bartholomew are just going to anyway. That's the other. Now I've gotten a few interesting books in the mail that I got off of Amazon that were for only like $10 each or $8 each or something. Almost any books you're going to buy off Amazon are going to be like at least say $7 or $8 because of shipping and handling is like $3.99. But they are the Life of the Fathers by St. Gregory of Tours, The Glory of the Martyrs by St. Gregory of Tours, and The Glory of the Confessors by St. Gregory of Tours, and fourth book. The personal and political poems of St. Venantius Fortunatus. So those are basically works from 6th century France or Gaul, and I'm going to be reading through some of this. Now, the Life of the Fathers, this translation, which is by Edward James, was actually published in English back in the late 1970s, I believe, by Father Seraphim Rose, who translated the Vita Patrum, I think, from a French translation from the 1880s. And that's actually a very good translation, and has a great introduction to it. So, any interesting material I find in those books, I'll be talking about. So we'll just have to wait. We got about 10. What is it? 8:50, right? We got about 10 minutes left, Father Joseph. So, any subjects you want to bring up, Father, that we've not brought up before? Hello? It looks like...
no, that's just my headset. I heard you and I was trying to talk. I'm interesting subjects. Well, let's see. We've dealt with the Roman Catholics. We've occasionally dealt with the Muslims. We've dealt with the Jews. We deal occasionally with Protestantism. We deal with different forms of...
Have we ever dealt with the Mormons?
We haven't dealt with the Mormons. I don't know if it's going to... Well, I take that back. I think we have. We've got to get a cataloging system here, because we have talked about the Mormons and the multiple planets and how the...
well, you know what's interesting is Mormonism claims that early Christianity was corrupted, like in the late 1st and early 2nd century, by Greek philosophy.
Yeah.
And one of their actual tenets of the Mormon faith is they do not believe in creation ex nihilo. The Mormon views the universe, matter always existed.
Which is technically Greek philosophy.
Exactly. That's a Greek pagan view. In fact, that is one of the defining aspects of paganism, rejection of creation ex nihilo, that matter has always existed. All right? So...
Atomic Lead asks a question. We'll get back to the Mormon thing in a second.
All right.
At any chance you could do a program on liturgies? We're kind of an apologetics show. I'm not exactly sure what kind of program you're talking about. What does that mean?
We could do something. I guess it'd have to relate to apologetics. I mean, I can bring. I mean, for example, I think
on the value of liturgy versus non-liturgical churches, that sort of thing. On the use of the Eucharist as opposed to the simple memorial. I guess there's a lot of different ways you could go with this. But yeah, we'd be glad to do that. Eventually we'd like to get something like that.
All right. Now, did I ever bring up on this show how if you look in some of the early Roman prefaces, they actually mention not using unleavened bread? Did I ever bring that up?
On the show, I'm thinking, did you bring this up on the...
I don't know.
Awesome.
Well, what is that? In some of the early Roman prefaces after Pentecost, like the 25th preface after Pentecost, they actually have mention of getting rid of the old leaven and using the new gifts. So that's a liturgical angle that has apologetic material in it. And it also shows you why the reformers, the so-called Hildebrandian reformers, as they took power, had to basically get rid of all the old prefaces, because there might be stuff left over that would reveal, the previous teachings of the pre-schism Latin Church, like how they used leavened bread as opposed to unleavened.
Right.
So, all right, we have 7 minutes left. We're probably not going to accomplish much in the intervening time here, Father Joseph. Atomic Lead. I mentioned that before. Okay, thank you. I sometimes I don't even remember what I've been talking about.
At least we'll need to do a categorization system. We have a lot of plans for the future of the show. I know that it always seems like it's kind of sloppy and ad hoc.
It's ad hoc because I don't know why. Why is it ad hoc, Father Joseph?
I think it's because of the fact that we kind of like. Well, one thing we need to do is we need to streamline all these episodes so we're not repeating ourselves. And I think another thing to do is, a lot of people, we do get a lot of people viewing the show. There's a few people live, and then a lot more people see it afterwards. And one day we'd like to, see if the show could support the time that we put into it, because we do spend a lot of time researching, in many cases, the answers that you're looking for. I'm not even sure how much time Father Enoch spent on St. Dionysius there, but it was a bit of time. The point is that we do work on this, and eventually we'd like to, I don't know, maybe one day do the super chats or however those things work. So we have some plan.
Well, you're not going to get to super chat level until it's like 1,000 subscribers. It's still a long way off from doing that stuff.
Yeah, so I don't understand what a super chat is. You taught me that.
I think it's when people give you like $1 to read their chat. It's like almost like they're giving you a donation for doing stuff. That's kind of what it is. It's kind of, but that's what I think it is.
Yeah, so basically we have to do more stuff in that sense in terms of structuring what we're gonna do, because there's a lot to discuss, a lot we have discussed, but we also don't want to run into the rut of repeating the same things over and over. And so we'll get there. We have a lot of episodes to catalog, and we'll work on it. So
all right. Now, did we talk about did I mention the fact that Orthodox had anathematized Darwinism?
We did. I think we did mention that in a previous show, and there's the question of Orthodox, their motivation, and we haven't even touched into the subject of we haven't touched into the subject of their anathema. And, I don't think we touched into that in detail. Okay. I personally don't like advertising Orthodox.
Why is that?
Well, I think that they're just as messed up as a lot of other people. But in any case, so that I don't give them a preference.
Well, I mean, the reason I posted it on NFTU was that they seem to be one of the only people that kind of update their website occasionally. So
that's true too, and that I will give them props for that. A lot of the true Orthodox churches and so on, they do a terrible job of updating their stuff. I mean, if I look here, let me see. What was the last thing we can possibly see here? Yeah, you see there's an ordination on September 12th. But on this is the Rokana, the group that was part Orthodox, part Rosi, Rokore. And, okay, so they have an archive of 3 things. Wow. And yet at the same time, there's the joint statement of the delegations of the Serbs and
maybe not a lot actually goes on.
Well, I think that's true to some degree. I think that.
Did we talk about the 38-year-old woman who was euthanized?
No, we did not.
Okay. Well, this is something that actually bears. At least we have a few minutes to talk about it, and I'm going to put it in the article. I'm going to put it in the comments right now. It was from LifeSite News, which is one of basically the biggest pro-life website. Here, and you can read along with it, Father Joseph, if you want to. Basically, a 38-year-old woman, I think, in Belgium, and she said she had incurable depression. She just could never, she was always depressed. And the doctor, and I guess her view was that I'm under constant stress and suffering, and a doctor agreed to, and basically they euthanized her. It says, in another horrifying example of the consequences of Belgium's euthanasia law, 3 doctors are facing trial. Now that's a good point. Accused of certifying a woman as autistic so that she could die by euthanasia. All right.
Kill autistic people?
Pardon me?
They can kill autistic people.
Yeah. Ty Niz died by lethal injection in 2010 at the age of 38. She had told 2 doctors and a psychiatrist that her suffering was unbearable and incurable, so she could qualify for euthanasia under Belgian law. However, her family says that her suffering was down to a broken heart after the end of the relationship, not autism. Now, but here's the point. Now, it's all very interesting. It's all very horrible article. I mean, horrible news. But would it really matter if she had autism? Would that really be a justification for euthanizing her? What's even worse, if you go on YouTube and you look about this story or any stories like this, and you look at the comments, and I'm actually surprised the amount of people who think it's great if you should be able to just kill yourself if you're just feeling depressed. Even if you have depression, people believe that stuff, Father Joseph.
Yeah.
I mean, even stuff about you look at all these programs that talk about mentally disabled children who have Down syndrome, and the amount of actual hatred of Down syndrome people in the comments on YouTube is just amazing.
Well, I think it's like only 1 out of every 10 Down syndrome diagnoses in the womb survive.
Yeah, but they're also having abortions for a lot of them too.
Right, that's what I mean.
Yeah. So my point is that there's actually, for example, there's an article there was a YouTube video about how Down syndrome is going to no longer be a case in Iceland very soon because of all the abortions that happen with Down syndrome children.
Yeah.
And in the YouTube comment section, everybody's like, "Oh, that's wonderful. They're going to kill all the Down syndrome. They're not people and blah blah blah. All this other stuff."
Well, first off, if you haven't discovered the cause for Down syndrome, you can't actually genetically engineer things so that it won't happen.
Yeah, but the point is still this: is they see no real value in people who the view is that somehow if you have Down syndrome, if you're have an IQ under 70 or something like that.
Oh yeah, no, I know what you're saying. I'm simply saying that it seems that if we're supposedly doing things for medical reasons, one would think that the idea would be to prevent Down syndrome from occurring, in the sense that it's a disability, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. That doesn't mean that the people who have Down syndrome aren't worth being people, or that we should kill them or abort them. I mean, I don't want to give that idea.
There's another look at if you read the article, there's another case of a doctor who drugged a 74-year-old dementia patient's coffee in order to get.
I didn't read that one.
Okay, that way they could get the relatives to hold them down while they gave them the lethal injection.
That just tells us that society is sick, and we've found new ways to be sick.
10% of cancer patients are euthanized in Flanders, some without consent.
Wow.
29-year-old woman was illness was euthanized recently.
If I remember, what is euthanasia literally translate from?
It means good death.
Yeah,
you means good.
That is
death. I think it means they're supposedly giving you a painless death.
Right. Well, the whole point is, I get it with assisted suicide. It's a good death because you're helping. It's that. The whole point was it was help. But if a person said not actually consenting to it, then it's not a good death. It's a murder.
Well, even in assisted suicide, that's well, I mean, it's what you call a euphemism.
Yeah, it's a murder where the person who died was an accomplice. But in any case, the point is, this is.
I think the other problem is that people view there's a modern. I guess it existed in the pagan world, and Christianity stamped it out. And the view, and it's kind of coming back with the de-Christianization of society. The Christian view was that suffering is not a bad thing, ultimately.
Right. No. Well, suffering is necessary.
Suffering is necessary. It's cathartic. It's purificatory.
Right.
That people have that a lot of this life is suffering. We have to go through. Christ went through suffering, and because of his suffering and his death and his resurrection, man can have eternal life. But man, I think there's somewhere in the scriptures, in the book of Acts, where it says, "We do not enter the kingdom of heaven except through much tribulation."
Yeah.
So and St. Paul says that he does not reckon that the sufferings of this present life will be anything compared to what we experience in the future glory. All right, but you still have to go through suffering.
Yeah.
And if you want, now imagine if somebody had a life where they had no suffering. There would be no growth in that person.
Yeah, that would be a very horrible life.
It's like staying in your parents' basement, getting everything done for you. For example, look at the children of trust funds who have everything provided for them.
And they end up committing suicide, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Or these actors that supposedly have everything they could want in the world, but they're the most miserable people in the world. Not all of them are, but a lot of them are, because there is no suffering.
On that kind of dark note,
it's not. Well, what the truth is that people need to suffer. Right. I know that sounds sadistic, but we need to suffer so we can grow.
We can become better, and it answers the question of suffering. Why do we suffer? It's because we need to be more complete. The idea that we can live in a world without suffering on this earth is it's ludicrous. But more importantly, we need to grow as people, and that is part of the reason why. And so, unfortunately, because that lesson's been lost, we live in a society that is looking for gratification and at every turn.
Even people who live lives of incurable physical suffering, there is a real sense in which if they believe in Christ and are part of the church, their physical suffering redounds not only to their own salvation, but to an example to other people.
Yes.
And the world does not like to hear the fact that, why would God make somebody or allow somebody to suffer? That seems cruel and sadistic. But again, the world's way of thinking is that of the immature 2-year-old who can't figure out why their parents don't allow them to have all the cookies they want, why their parents make them take a bath, why their parents make them go to bed at a time, and all the rest. I mean, a 2-year-old thinks this is just horrible suffering that the parents are putting them through. Even younger children think it's all horrible. But when they get older, they realize that these are actually good things the parents allowed to happen to them. That they, for example, the person who's riding his bicycle and they take off the training wheels and they may fall down a lot, but they're learning an important lesson about how to ride a bike. So, I don't know. You're a parent, Father Joseph. You understand these things.
I understand it completely. Okay. Now, on that note, we'll be back tomorrow.
All right. Well, we'll try to answer some of the other questions about Isaac the Syrian tomorrow too.
Yeah, we'll try to get into more detail with that.
All right.
All right. Well, have a good night, everyone. Thank you for listening, as always. And once again, have a good night.
Benedicite.
Benedicite.
Oh.